The day the aliens arrived changed everything. Their massive ship appeared in Earth's orbit without warning, casting a shadow over major cities as it slowly circled the planet. After 3 days of silence that left world leaders panicking, the aliens finally sent a message. They called themselves the Galactic Concordat, a coalition of 7 advanced species who had been traveling the stars for thousands of years. "We come in peace," their message said in perfect English. "We wish to meet with your leaders." John Miller adjusted his tie nervously as he prepared to meet the alien representatives. As Earth's newly appointed ambassador, the weight of humanity's future rested on his shoulders. At 62, he had spent his life in diplomatic service, but nothing had prepared him for this. "Ready, Ambassador?" asked Dr. Lisa Franklin, standing beside him at the entrance to the meeting chamber. The brilliant physicist had been chosen to join the delegation for her scientific expertise. "As ready as I'll ever be," John replied with a small smile. The doors slid open. 5 alien beings waited inside. Each looked completely different from the others. One had blue-tinted skin with 4 arms. Another was tall and slender with glossy scales. A third floated slightly above the ground, surrounded by a faint glow. The apparent leader stepped forward. He looked almost human except for his violet eyes and the subtle shimmer of his skin. "Welcome, humans. I am Verix, High Counselor of the Concordat," he said, his voice melodic. "We are pleased to finally meet your species." The meeting lasted for hours. The aliens explained their society, their technology, and their interest in Earth. They had been observing humanity for decades, they admitted, waiting for humans to develop certain technologies before making contact. All seemed to be going well until Dr. Franklin mentioned human life expectancy during a discussion about medical advancements. "Our average lifespan is around 80 years now," she explained. "With our newest medical treatments, we hope to extend that to 90 or even 100 years in the near future." The room fell silent. The aliens exchanged glances. "Did you say 80 years?" asked Verix. His tone had changed. Where there had been respect before, now there was something else. Pity. "Yes," said Dr. Franklin, confused by their reaction. "Is that significant?" One of the other aliens, a being made of what looked like flowing crystal, made a sound that might have been laughter. "Forgive Nexer," said Verix. "It's just surprising. Most of our species live for at least 500 years. Some, like the Valteri, live for over 1,000. John felt his cheeks growing hot. The way Verix said it made it sound like humans were somehow defective. "How unfortunate for your kind," continued Verix. "To have such a brief moment of existence. It explains much about your hurried civilization." "What do you mean by that?" asked John, trying to keep his voice level. "Your constant wars, your rapid consumption of resources, your frantic technological development," Verix explained. "These are the behaviors of beings who know their time is short. You live like mayflies, trying to experience everything before your flame extinguishes." The other aliens were nodding in agreement. One whispered to another, not quietly enough, "Is it even worth bringing them into the coalition? They'll all be dead before any meaningful projects can be completed." Dr. Franklin cleared her throat. "Our lifespans may be shorter than yours, but we accomplish quite a lot in that time." Of course," said Verix, his tone patronizing. "It's remarkable what you've achieved with your limitations." The rest of the meeting was tense. The aliens continued to make comments about human temporal disadvantage and how admirable it was that humans could be so passionate about things when they had so little time to exist. As the delegation left the meeting, John pulled Dr. Franklin aside. "They think we're like children," he muttered. "They're underestimating us," she replied. "And that might be our advantage." John nodded slowly. "Then let's show them what humans can do in our limited time." Neither of them knew it then, but this was just the beginning of humanity's most important challenge yet. 3 weeks after first contact, the Galactic Concordat surprised everyone. Despite their clear disdain for human lifespans, They invited Earth to establish an embassy on their central world, Nexus Prime. "We don't understand," John said during the video conference with Varix. "Your people clearly think we're inferior." Varix's violet eyes blinked slowly. "The Concordat values diversity, Ambassador Miller. Short-lived or not, humans show potential. Some council members are curious about your species." John wasn't convinced. "This sounds like we'd be specimens in a zoo." "Think of it as an opportunity," Varix replied smoothly. "Your people could learn much from us." After the call ended, John met with Earth's Leadership Council. The debate lasted for days, but the final decision was clear. Humanity couldn't pass up this chance. "We need to select our team carefully," John told Dr. Franklin as they left the final meeting. "We need people who won't be intimidated by their condescension." Lisa nodded. "I know just who to bring." 1 month later, the human delegation prepared to depart. John and Lisa had selected 10 others, including Captain Alan Wright, a steady military man with combat experience, and Dr. Susan Bennett, a brilliant xenobiologist with a gift for understanding alien biology. The Concordat sent a ship to transport them. It was massive and sleek, with technology that made Earth's most advanced spacecraft look like ancient relics. As they boarded, Captain Wright whistled softly. "They're showing off." "Remember, we're representing all of humanity," John reminded everyone. "Stay professional, no matter what they say." The journey to Nexus Prime took 3 weeks. The human delegation was given comfortable quarters, but limited access to the ship. 2 aliens served as their guides: Krell, a reptilian being with emerald scales, and Mira, who looked almost human except for her silver skin and 6 fingers on each hand. On the 5th day, Alan and Susan were walking back to their quarters when they overheard Krell speaking to another crew member in a side corridor. "Such a waste of resources," Krell was saying. "By the time they learn enough to be useful to the Concordat, they'll be dead of old age." "The Council has its reasons," the other alien replied. "Perhaps they'll make interesting pets, at least." Ellen started forward, but Susan grabbed his arm. "Not now," she whispered. "Remember what the ambassador said." Reluctantly, Alan nodded. The next day, the humans were invited to observe the ship's command center. The technology was beyond anything they had imagined. Holographic displays showed star systems in perfect detail. The ship seemed to navigate without conventional engines, somehow bending space around it. "This is incredible," Lisa said, examining one of the control panels. "How long did it take your people to develop this technology?" The ship's captain, a tall being named Zorak, waved a tentacle dismissively. "About 600 years to perfect the current model." 600 years, Lisa repeated, eyes wide. "Yes," Zorak said proudly. "We take our time to ensure perfection. The benefit of our natural lifespans." John noticed how slowly the crew moved, how deliberate each action seemed. There was no urgency, no rush. When a minor alert sounded, 3 crew members spent nearly an hour discussing the proper response before taking action. That night, the human delegation met privately in John's quarters. "Did you see how they work?" Susan asked. "They debate everything endlessly." Ellen nodded. "Their security protocols are thorough but incredibly slow. In a real crisis, that approach would be disastrous." "They don't face many crises," Lisa pointed out. "With their lifespans, they can afford patience." John looked thoughtful. "But we can't. And maybe that's not a weakness after all." "What do you mean?" Susan asked. "I mean," John said slowly, "that we accomplish in decades what takes them centuries. We adapt faster, innovate quicker. We have to." As Nexus Prime came into view on their final day of travel, a stunning planet with gleaming cities visible even from space, John gathered his team. "Remember why we're here," he told them. "They think our short lives make us less valuable. Let's show them just how much humans can accomplish when time isn't on our side." 6 months had passed since the humans arrived on Nexus Prime. The embassy was now fully operational, set up in a gleaming tower in the alien capital city. While the aliens had expected humans to still be struggling with basic cultural adaptations, the human team had already mastered local customs, learned key phrases in 3 Concordat languages, and modified Earth technology to work with alien systems. Captain Alan Wright stepped onto the training floor of the Concordat Security Academy. He had been coming here for weeks, exchanging combat techniques with a Concordat officer named Zelfar. At first, the alien had agreed only as a courtesy, clearly expecting little from a human. "Good morning, Alan," said Zelfar. The alien stood nearly 7 feet tall, with gray skin that shimmered slightly in the light. Despite being over 300 years old, he looked physically fit. "Morning, Zel," Alan replied. "Ready to try that new fighting style today?" Zelfar tilted his head. "You mean the one I showed you yesterday? But that was just the introduction. It normally takes our cadets at least 2 months to begin practicing the actual moves." Alan grinned. "I've been practicing all night. Watch." He moved to the center of the floor and performed a complex series of movements, nearly perfect despite having seen them only once. Zelfar's eyes widened. "That's impossible. You couldn't have mastered that so quickly." "Not mastered," Alan corrected. "Just learn the basics. Humans are good at that, picking things up quickly." Meanwhile, in the science division, Dr. Susan Bennett was making discoveries of her own. She had been granted limited access to Concordat biological data and had noticed something fascinating. "Dr. Franklin, look at these brain scans," Susan said, pointing to her screen where images of various alien brains were displayed. "I've been comparing them by age." Lisa leaned in closer. "What am I looking for?" "See these neural connection patterns? In young Concordat members, they're constantly forming new pathways, like human brains. But after about 100 years, something changes." Susan switched to another image. The neural pathways become fixed. They barely form new connections after that point. "You're saying their brains stop adapting?" Lisa asked. "Not completely, but the rate drops dramatically. They live longer, but their minds become more rigid with time." Susan sat back in her chair. "Their longevity comes with a cost. Decreased neural plasticity." Across the embassy, Ambassador Miller was meeting with Verix and other Concordat officials. What had been scheduled as a brief introduction to Concordat history had turned into something else entirely. "You've already completed the historical knowledge assessment?" Verix asked, his voice betraying surprise. "That course typically takes new species 2 years to finish." "We've always been quick learners," John replied modestly, "and we established a rotation system so our team could study in shifts." Another alien counselor, Drax, leaned forward. "But the cultural nuance examinations are meant to be contemplated slowly with proper reflection." "We reflected," John said. "We just did it faster than you expected." That evening, the human team gathered in their private conference room, which they had swept for listening devices daily. Another habit the aliens found peculiar. "They keep underestimating us," Alan said, leaning against the wall. "Zelfar was shocked that I could learn in weeks what takes their people years." Susan shared her findings about alien neural plasticity. Their brains become less adaptable as they age. They're literally slower to learn new things. "It makes sense," Lisa added. "With centuries to live, they never developed our capacity for quick adaptation." "They don't need to." John nodded thoughtfully. "And that might be their blind spot. They see our short lives as a weakness, but they don't understand what that limitation has given us." "Urgency," Alan said. "Adaptability," added Susan. "Innovation," Lisa continued. "We can't afford to spend decades debating a new technology or approach." John looked around at his team, feeling a new sense of purpose. "We need to document this, not just for our reports back to Earth, but to help the Concordat understand. Our short lives aren't a defect. They're the reason we might actually have something valuable to offer this alliance." As the meeting ended, an alert sounded throughout the city. Emergency signals flashed, and announcements in multiple languages echoed through the halls. John's communicator buzzed with a message from Varix. Urgent situation. Request human presence at Central Command immediately. The team exchanged glances. Whatever was happening, it seemed the Concordat suddenly needed their short-lived human perspective. The human team rushed to Central Command. The massive circular room was filled with Concordat officials moving at what, for them, passed as urgent pace. Holographic displays showed a research station orbiting a nearby moon. Red warning symbols flashed around it. What's happening? John asked as they approached Varix. The Stellar Research Station has suffered a critical failure, Varix explained, his normally calm voice slightly raised. Their experimental reactor is leaking radiation. The station's containment fields are failing. How many people are on that station? Lisa asked. 43 researchers and support staff, answered a tall, willowy alien with luminescent skin. How long until complete containment failure? Lisa continued. The alien blinked slowly. Our models suggest between 15 and 20 days. 20 days, Ellen exclaimed. Why haven't you evacuated them already? Varix's expression showed confusion. The Council of Science must first analyze all potential solutions. Then the Security Council must approve the safest option. Then we must prepare proper rescue vessels. The standard procedure will take approximately 11 days. The humans exchanged glances. You don't have 11 days, Lisa said firmly. If that radiation spreads through the station, those people could suffer permanent damage well before your evacuation arrives. And what do you suggest? Asked an elderly council member with obvious skepticism. Your species has no experience with our technology. John stepped forward. Let us help. Dr. Franklin is an expert in energy systems. Captain Wright has crisis response training. We can assemble a team immediately. The council chamber erupted in debate. The aliens argued among themselves, some insisting on following protocols, others curious about the human offer. This is ridiculous, Ellen whispered to Susan. While they debate, people are in danger. After an hour, with no decision made, Lisa stepped up to a control panel. Without asking permission, she began studying the station schematics. What are you doing? Demanded a security officer. Learning your systems, Lisa replied without looking up. The radiation is coming from a breach in the cooling system. It's fixable if acted on quickly. Our experts have determined the repair would take at least 5 years, said Varix. The chamber must be rebuilt entirely, or patched temporarily to allow safe evacuation. Lisa countered. We don't need a perfect solution. We need a working solution, now. More debate followed. The humans grew increasingly frustrated as precious hours passed with no action taken. Finally, John made a bold decision. Councillor Varix, we respect your procedures, he said, but if you won't act immediately, we request permission to mount our own rescue mission. The chamber fell silent. Impossible, said one alien. You lack the knowledge. You would all die, said another. The radiation levels are too dangerous for your fragile bodies. Maybe, Alan said, but we'd rather try than stand here talking while those researchers die. Varix studied the humans carefully. Finally, he spoke. The council grants provisional permission. You may take one transport vessel and whatever supplies you need. But understand this, we cannot guarantee your safety. The next hours were a blur of activity. The humans moved at a pace that shocked the aliens. Lisa quickly adapted Concordat radiation protection gear to human specifications. Ellen assembled a volunteer team, including Zelfar, who surprised everyone by offering to join the humans. Your mission has a high probability of failure, Zelfar told Alan as they prepared the transport. Maybe, Alan replied, but standing by definitely leads to failure. 72 hours after the crisis began, the human team had reached the station, established a safe entry point, and begun evacuating the researchers. Using modified Concordat tools and improvised solutions, they created a temporary seal on the radiation leak, a patch that would hold long enough for everyone to escape safely. When the transport returned to Nexus Prime, the human team was exhausted. They had all suffered minor radiation exposure despite their precautions, but all 43 station personnel were alive and safe. The Concordat Council was waiting in the docking bay. They stared at the humans with new expressions, not pity or condescension, but something else entirely. Something that looked remarkably like respect, mixed with confusion. "You did in 3 days what our experts said would take 5 years, Varix said softly. "How is this possible?" John, tired but standing tall, simply answered, "When you don't have time to waste, you find solutions others might miss." For the first time since their arrival, the aliens had no response. News of the humans' successful rescue mission spread quickly throughout the Concordat. Many aliens were impressed by their quick thinking and bravery, but not everyone was pleased. 2 weeks after the rescue, John was called to an urgent meeting with the Concordat High Council. When he arrived, he found not just Varix, but a dozen other high-ranking aliens seated in a semicircle. Their expressions were serious. "Ambassador Miller," began an elderly alien named Drax, "we wish to discuss a concerning matter." "What's wrong?" John asked, taking his seat. "The matter is your species," said Drax bluntly. "While we acknowledge your assistance with the research station, many council members believe humans represent a potential danger to the Concordat." John blinked in surprise. "A danger? We just saved 43 of your people." "Yes," said another counselor, a floating being composed of shimmering light. "And you did so by ignoring proper procedures, taking dangerous risks, and making hasty decisions without full analysis." "We call that being effective," John replied, trying to keep his voice level. "Your species acts too quickly," Drax continued. "You make decisions without proper contemplation. Your short lifespans seem to make you reckless, willing to try untested methods simply because they might work slightly faster." John looked around the room. Some counselors nodded in agreement with Drax, but others, including Varix, seemed less certain. "A significant faction of the council," Drax said, "proposes limiting human involvement in Concordat affairs. You would remain observers only, without decision-making authority or access to our advanced technology." John felt his face grow hot with anger, but he kept his voice calm. "After everything we've shown you, you still think our shorter lives make us less valuable." "Not less valuable," Drax corrected. "More unpredictable, more dangerous." John stood up slowly. "Then let's settle this with a challenge." The council chamber grew quiet. "What do you mean?" asked Varix. "A series of tests," John explained. "Technological problems, diplomatic scenarios, crisis simulations. Let humans compete directly against Concordat representatives. Judge us by our results, not by how many years we live." The council members murmured among themselves. Finally, Varix spoke. "An interesting proposal. What would these challenges involve?" For the next hour, they debated the terms. Eventually, they agreed on 5 challenges: a technological innovation task, a diplomatic negotiation exercise, a crisis response simulation, a cultural adaptation test, and a knowledge acquisition challenge. "The competition will begin tomorrow," Drax announced. "Each species will select their best representatives." As John left the chamber, he contacted his team immediately. "We have a problem," he told them, explaining the situation. "They're still fixated on our lifespans," Lisa said with frustration. "Then we'll show them what humans can accomplish in our limited time," Alan replied. That night, the human team prepared intensively. Susan reviewed all her research on Concordat biology and psychology. Lisa studied their most advanced technology. Alan analyzed their tactical approaches. The next morning, the competition began. In the technology challenge, Lisa created an improved energy conversion system in 6 hours, while the Concordat team was still designing their approach. In the diplomatic exercise, John negotiated a complex treaty that satisfied all parties, while the Concordat representative became bogged down in minor details. For 3 days, the challenges continued. The humans didn't win every contest, but they consistently completed tasks in a fraction of the time the aliens required. On the final day, Susan presented her research to the full council. Her presentation was titled, "Compressed Time: The Human Advantage." "Your species values stability, consistency, and perfection," she explained. "With centuries to live, you can afford to take your time. But humans evolved differently." She displayed brain scans of humans and Concordat members. "Our neural pathways are constantly forming new connections throughout our lives. We're built to adapt, to learn quickly, to innovate under pressure." Susan looked directly at Drax. "In your 800 years, you've mastered 3 scientific disciplines. Our scientists often work across 5 or 6 fields in a 40-year career. What we lack in time, we make up for in intensity of experience and adaptation." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Humans don't just live short lives. We live dense lives, packed with learning, change, and growth. We accomplish in decades what takes you centuries, not because we're better, but because we have to." As Susan finished speaking, the council chamber was completely silent. The aliens looked at each other, then back at the humans, seeing them with new eyes. 3 days after the challenges ended, the Concordat called a special gathering. It was to be held in the Grand Chamber, a massive hall normally reserved for the most important ceremonies. All human delegates were invited, along with hundreds of Concordat representatives from every member species. John and his team entered the hall feeling nervous. Despite their strong performance in the challenges, they had received no official decision from the council. "What do you think this is about?" Susan whispered as they took their seats. "Either they're accepting us or sending us home," Alan replied. "Either way, at least we showed them what humans can do." The room fell silent as an ancient alien named Thelos walked slowly to the central platform. Thelos was known as one of the oldest living members of the Concordat, a philosopher who had lived for over 800 years. Friends, colleagues, and honored human guests, Thelos began, his voice surprisingly strong for his apparent age. "I have spent the last 3 days in deep meditation on what we have witnessed." The crowd waited in respectful silence. "For eons, the Concordat has valued longevity above all else," Thelos continued. "We measure wisdom in centuries lived, knowledge in decades accumulated, success in the long, slow march toward perfection." He turned to face the humans. Then these beings arrived. These humans, with their mayfly lives, their urgent pace, their willingness to accept good enough rather than perfect. And I confess, like many of you, I pitied them. John tensed, preparing for more condescension. "I was wrong," Thelos said simply. A murmur ran through the crowd. "We have been measuring life incorrectly," Thelos explained. "We count it in years. Humans count it in experiences, in accomplishments, in moments of meaning." Thelos gestured, and a holographic display appeared above him, showing the results of the challenges. In 1 week, these humans solved problems our experts would take years to address. Not because they are smarter, but because they see time differently than we do. Captain Allen stood up. "With your permission," he said, addressing Thelos, "I'd like to show you something." Thelos nodded, and Allen approached the platform. Lisa handed him a data crystal, which he inserted into the display system. "These are human military tactics," Allen explained as images appeared above. "This shows how our strategies evolved over 100 years." The aliens watched as warfare methods transformed dramatically through the short span. "Now," Allen said, "these are Concordat military approaches over the same period." He displayed a new set of images, showing almost identical tactics with only minor variations across a century. "You perfect the same strategies," Allen said. "We constantly reinvent ours, because we have to." As Allen returned to his seat, Dr. Lisa stepped forward. "I'd like to share something too, if I may." When given permission, She activated another display. This is human art, music, and literature from just one human decade. The display showed thousands of works, paintings, songs, books, films, created in a brief 10-year span. We create so much because we know our time is short, Lisa explained. We feel deeply, we express intensely, we love and grieve with our whole hearts because we understand how precious each moment is. The chamber was completely silent now. Many aliens were leaning forward, watching with new interest. Thelos spoke again. For centuries, I pitied beings with short lives. Now I understand that humans don't have less life than us. They simply burn more brightly. He turned to Drax and the other skeptical council members. We have been measuring the wrong thing. Not the length of life, but its depth. Not its duration, but its intensity. Thelos faced the humans directly. Your species does not suffer from a disadvantage. You have evolved a different kind of wisdom, the wisdom of urgency, of seeing clearly what matters most because you cannot afford to waste time. He bowed deeply to the human delegation, an unprecedented gesture of respect. The Concordat has much to learn from humans, Thelos announced. Not despite your mortality, but because of it. You have mastered living fully in limited time, perhaps the greatest wisdom of all. John felt a lump in his throat. For the first time since meeting the Concordat, he didn't feel pitied or condescended to. He felt truly seen and understood. As the chamber erupted in discussion, Varix approached the humans. It seems, he said with a slight smile, that we have been the limited ones after all. 1 month after Thelos' speech, the Concordat and Earth signed a historic agreement. The document officially recognized humans as full and equal members of the galactic community, not despite their short lives, but because of what they achieved within them. The signing ceremony took place in Earth's new embassy on Nexus Prime. The building itself was a testament to human efficiency, designed and constructed in just 3 months, blending human and alien architectural styles in ways neither civilization had imagined before. Today marks a new chapter for both our peoples, Ambassador John said as he signed the agreement. His hair had more gray in it now than when he'd first arrived, a fact that fascinated many of the aliens in attendance. Varix signed for the Concordat. We welcome humans not as junior partners, but as equals with unique perspectives and abilities. After the ceremony, John found himself speaking with Thelos in a quiet corner of the garden. I've been studying human philosophy, Thelos told him. Your thinkers grappled with mortality in ways ours never needed to. Our briefest moments often matter the most to us, John replied. A child's first steps, a wedding day, a peaceful final breath. We treasure these things because they're fleeting. Thelos nodded slowly. We have lived so long that we stopped noticing the preciousness of moments. Across the embassy, Captain Allen and Zelfar were finalizing plans for a joint military training program. The program would teach Concordat forces to respond more quickly to crises, while humans would learn the aliens' thorough analytical approaches. Your soldiers will train our warriors to make faster decisions, Zelfar said, and we will teach yours to see patterns that unfold over longer periods. A perfect balance, Ellen agreed. Your perspective of centuries, our perspective of decades. Both valuable in different situations. In the science wing, Dr. Susan and Lisa were meeting with Concordat researchers about a new exchange program. The program would send young aliens to Earth and human scientists to various Concordat worlds. We believe spending time in your fast-paced culture will help our younger members develop greater neural flexibility, a Concordat scientist explained. And our scientists can benefit from your long-term research projects and multi-generational experiments, Lisa replied. The most surprising development came a week later when the Concordat offered to share their life extension technology with humanity. The technology could potentially extend human lifespans to 200 years or more. When news of this offer reached Earth, the human leadership called an emergency meeting with the embassy team. Should we accept? asked the Earth president in a video conference. This could change everything for our species. The room fell silent as everyone considered the question. Not everyone will want this, John said finally. Many humans find meaning in our mortality. Perhaps it should be a choice, Susan suggested, available to those who want it, but not mandatory. And perhaps, Lisa added, not too long a life. Enough to see more of what the universe offers, but not so long that we lose our sense of urgency and wonder. In the end, Earth and the Concordat agreed on a modified version of the technology that could extend human life to about 150 years, longer but still brief by alien standards. 6 months later, John stood on a stage at a university on Earth. Before him sat a graduating class of students, along with several Concordat visitors, including Thelos, who had requested to visit Earth personally. Today I have the honor of introducing our commencement speaker, John said, a being who has lived for over 8 centuries, yet came all this way to share wisdom with young humans just beginning their relatively brief lives. Thelos approached the podium, looking out at the sea of young faces with genuine wonder. Young humans, he began, your species has taught the Concordat something we had forgotten over our long existence. You have shown us that it is not the years in your life that matter, but the life in your years. He gestured to the graduates. You will live 1/8 of my lifetime, yet you may well accomplish more. You burn more brightly. In your brief flames, you create light and heat that will last for ages. Thelos bowed his head. We no longer pity your mortality. In many ways, we envy your urgency, your clarity about what matters most. As John watched the students rise to applaud, he thought about how far they had come. From being mocked for their short lives to being respected for how they lived them. The universe, it seemed, had room for many kinds of wisdom, including the wisdom that could only come from a species that understood just how precious and brief life could be.